And your job as an engineer would be very easy. So fortunately, there is noise. We can talk about that too. It's a philosophical question, right? About variation in life, right? If you didn't have it, life would be extremely boring because we'd all look the same, we'd all be the same. We can talk about that later. So Nushin, please take it away. Hopefully you're there. Are you good? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So please take it away.
Okay, thank you.
Is she sharing hers?
Sorry?
Yeah.
Yes,
if you
can
If
continue.
you could speak up as best you can, that'd be great.
Yeah, welcome and thank you for joining today's session. Before we get started, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Nushin Jafarpeshe, and I completed my PhD in electrical and computer engineering at Concordia University in Montreal, where I focus on machine learning in ultrasound imaging and surgical robotics. Right now, I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Toronto in the My Data Lab under the supervision of Dr. Tyrell. My research centers on deep learning, medical image analysis, and generative AI with a special focus on ultrasound imaging. In this lecture, I'll explore three important perturbations in AI imaging: adversarial perturbations, Gaussian noise, and resolution loss. These factors show us how fragile deep learning models can be when faced with changes that are either invisible to the human eye or easily overlooked. We'll see how each perturbation alters image quality and how that in turn affects model performance. My aim is not only to explain the technical background, but also to highlight the real-world implication for deploying AI safely in healthcare. By the end, you'll have a clear picture of why robustness matters as much as accuracy in medical AI. The first section of this talk is based on the work of a former ROP student in our lab, Yushi Zhu. So let's start with the concept of perturbations. When we say perturbation, we mean any alternation to an input image that changes how the model interprets it. These changes can be intentional, for example, someone deliberately modifying an image to trick a model, or it can be unintentional, like background noise from the imaging system. What's fascinating and also concerning is that many perturbations are imperceptible to humans. You and I could look at an image and see no difference, yet an AI model might completely change its prediction. That's what makes perturbation so important to study in medical imaging, where mistakes can directly affect patient care. Perturbation can take many forms, but in today's lecture, I'll focus on three: adversarial perturbations, Gaussian noise, and resolution loss. Adversarial perturbations are deliberately engineered to fool models. Gaussian noise arises naturally, often due to sensors or transmission issues. Resolution loss happens when images are downsampled or recorded at lower quality, which can obscure details. Each of these has a unique effect on models, and understanding the difference helps us design strategies to make AI more resilient. Let's start by diving deeper into the first one: adversarial perturbations. This is where things get really interesting because these perturbations are not accidental. They are engineered to break the model. Adversarial perturbations are a form of intentional attack against AI models. Here's how they work. Very small, carefully designed changes are added to the input image. These changes are typically imperceptible to humans. If you look at the two X-ray here, the original and the perturbated version with epsilon equal to 0.002, they look the same to us, but the model's prediction can completely flip. The reason this happens is because the perturbations are not random. They are calculated using the model's own gradients. In other words, the attacker knows how the model computes its loss, and they exploit that pathway. This makes this perturbation much more powerful than simple noise. The impact is significant. The model can misclassify with very high confidence. For example, an image that should be classified as pneumonia might suddenly be predicted as normal with 99 confidence. From a clinical perspective, this is dangerous because adversarial perturbation could potentially be used to manipulate AI-based diagnosis or triage system. Even if the threat is not yet widespread in healthcare studying, them teaches us about the fragility of our models and pushes us toward making them more robust. This slide explains how adversarial attacks are actually generated. The first method is FGSM, or Fast Gradient Sign Method. It's a one-step method where we add a small amount of noise in the direction of the gradient of the loss function. The formula here shows that the adversarial example is the original input plus epsilon times the sign of the gradient. Think of epsilon as the size of the steps, which is the strength of the perturbation. A very small epsilon means the change is almost invisible, but it can still flip the prediction. The second method is PGD, or projected gradient descent. This is like a multi-step FGSM, but instead of one quick push, it takes many tiny pushes in the worst possible direction. After each push, we make sure the image stays within what's called an epsilon ball. So what is the epsilon ball? Imagine drawing a tiny sphere around the original image in pixel space. As long as the perturbated image stays inside that sphere, it's considered a valid adversarial example. In other words, we allow the image to change only within this very small radius, so it remains visually the same to humans. The overall goal for both FGSM and PGD is the same: trick the model into misclassifying while keeping the image visually unchanged. To our eyes, nothing looks different, but to the model, the changes are enough to cause major errors. Now let's look at what happens to model performance under these adversarial attacks. Here we have a graph showing how sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy change as the adversarial noise level, which is epsilon, increases. You can see that performance drops very steeply. Specificity is the most affected. That means the model starts to incorrectly call negatives as positives more often. Accuracy and sensitivity also decline. At epsilon equals 0.006, the model actually performs worse than random chance on key metrics. And what's striking is that even when the structural similarity index, or SSIM, remains very high around 0.9987, which means the image looks almost identical to humans, the model's predictions are still completely unreliable. This highlights just how fragile AI models are to imperceptible changes. So, why does this matter in real world healthcare? Well, methods like FGSM and PGD can steadily modify inputs to flip prediction, even when the image looks unchanged to us. Research has shown that even FDA-approved AI models can be fooled this way. That raises serious safety concerns because in clinical practice, an AI model could be giving the wrong output while doctors and patients still see what looks like a normal image. The big takeaway here is that invisible attack could undermine trust and reliability in medical AI unless we build in safeguards. This slide shows another important detail. Here we plot accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity against SSIM. Even at very high SSIM values, above 0.998, all three metrics drop sharply. Again, specificity is the most affected, which means the model is not classifying negative as positive at a high rate. So even though the image looks the same to us, adversarial noise causes major misclassification. This is what makes these attacks so dangerous. They exploit the gap between human perception and model vulnerability. Now, let me ask you to try it yourself. On this slide, we have multiple chest X-ray images. One of them is the original, and the others have adversarial perturbations added. Can you tell me which one is untouched?
How to say which
Any
one?
idea?
Third one. Third one.
It's the third one. That's what they're saying. Audience is saying third one, Nushi.
Third one. Yeah, third one is original. That's correct. Yeah, so it's actually hard to identify the adversarial altered image by eye, and that's exactly the point. So these changes are usually imperceptible to human, but highly affect against models. This demonstrates the challenge. How do we make AI system robust when when the problem is essentially sometimes invisible to us? Because they all look actually similar. So to summarize, adversarial attacks exploit the sensitivity of AI models to very small, carefully chosen changes. They cause large performance drop even when the image looks identical to us. This is a critical challenge in deploying AI in healthcare. We need robust defense to ensure that models can't be tricked in this way. Now let's focus on Gaussian noise, one of the key perturbations. Gaussian noise is specifically relevant in imaging because unlike adversarial noise, it actually occurs in real-world data collection. For example, through sensor variations or transmission artifacts. So while adversarial perturbations are artificial, Gaussian noise is naturally unavoidable and models must be able to handle it. So what exactly is Gaussian noise in imaging? Gaussian noise arises from two main sources. First, sensor variation, like electronic or thermal noise in the acquisition hardware. And second, compression or transmission artifacts, when images are stored or sent. It's modeled mathematically as random noise followed a normal distribution with mean zero and various sigma squared. When applied, this reduces clarity and contrast and blur fine anatomical details. If you look at the image on the right, the original is on the left, and when we add noise with a standard deviation of 0.04, the anatomical borders start fading. And this matters because radiologist level models depend on those subtle details, distort them, and performance begins to break down. Now, how does Gaussian noise affect model performance? The trend is gradual. As the noise level increases, accuracy steadily declines. This concave down curve means small amount of noise aren't too harmful, but once sigma passes a threshold, the drop accelerates. Interestingly, sensitivity tends to increase while specificity collapses. That means the model starts classifying almost everything as pneumonia in this example. So in practice, Gaussian noise disrupts feature extraction, causes mild misclassification, and pushes the model toward overdiagnosis. Compared to adversarial attacks, models are more robust here, but Gaussian noise still poses a real-world threat. Another way to look at this is through SSIM. As SSIM decreases, meaning the image is more distorted, both accuracy and specificity fall. But notice, sensitivity remains high. The model continues to pick up pneumonia in most cases, but with many false positives. This makes sense intuitively. More noise leads to more confusion. So the system becomes overly cautious and flag too many cases, which can burden radiologists in practice. Let's have another challenge. I have placed several chest X-ray images here, and one of them is the original, while the others are corrupted with Gaussian noise. Which one do you think is the original one?
Which one? Fourth one.
Are we going for fourth?
Yeah, fourth one.
And no.
No, then the third one.
No, actually, it's the second one.
Okay.
Second one is the original one. So at first glance, it's very difficult to distinguish which one is clean, but actually, that's exactly the challenge the model faces. If the difference is subtle enough that the human eye struggles, then deep networks trained on clean data will also misclassify. The third type of perturbation we need to consider is resolution loss. Unlike adversarial perturbation, which are engineered, and unlike Gaussian noise, which comes from natural randomness in sensors, resolution loss is a very practical and common issue. It happens when images are captured or processed at a lower quality. For example, when scans are compressed, downsampled, or resized. The danger here is not that the image looks suspiciously altered, but that fine diagnosis details are quietly blurred away. In medical imaging, those details often carry the subtle patterns that AI relies on, such as texture inside the lungs or joint structure. So, resolution loss is about being tricked, at more about information literally disappearing. And that makes it an especially important challenge for real-world deployment. Resolution loss can occur in two main ways. First, if the imaging system itself is low resolution, and second, if during data processing, we downsample and then upscale the image. On the right, you can see an example with chest X-ray. The first is the original image, and the second has been downsampled to 30% of the original scale. What we notice is that the fine anatomical structures like lung texture become blurred. That's important because subtle patterns in the lung are often what AI models rely on. So even if the overall shape is still clear, important diagnostic details are weakened. This makes the model more uncertain and can reduce its reliability. Here, we look at how model performance changes as the resolution is reduced. On the graph, accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity are plotted against scaling factor. As we downsample, accuracy gradually declines, but the drop is milder compared to adversarial attacks or Gaussian noise. Interestingly, sensitivity tends to remain high. This means the model continues to predict positive even if the image is blurry, but specificity decreases. In practice, this means the model is overcalling disease. It marks healthy cases as abnormal. So, although the model is technically still correct often enough, the balance between false positives and false negatives shifts in a way that matters clinically. This slide explains resolution loss in terms of SSIM, which is a measure of image quality that aligns more closely with human perception. As SSIM decreases, meaning the image looks less similar to the original, all performance metrics also degrade steadily. Unlike adversarial perturbation, where performance collapses despite the image looking normal, here the degradation aligns with what we can actually see. When detail is lost, such as texture in the lung, the AI also loses information and struggle to interpret the image correctly. This shows us that resolution loss reflects a more intuitive type of degradation. Both humans and models suffer in parallel when the resolution is reduced. Okay, so to illustrate this point, here's another challenge. Among these chest X-ray images, one is the original and the others are downsampled version. So which one is original?
4. 4.
And no?
Then the first one.
Actually, last one is original.
Okay.
Yeah, they look very similar.
You're
It's
not supposed to keep like that. You have to keep in the same place. Okay.
yeah, it takes effort and often zooming in to spot which one retains the finest detail. Uh, Actually, this exercise demonstrates how hard it can be to recognize resolution loss when it's subtle. But AI models, which rely on pixel level patterns, are sensitive to these differences. So while we may struggle to tell the original from the downsampled versions, the model's performance already starts to drop, especially in terms of specificity. This highlights why maintaining resolution and preserving unnecessary downsampling is critical in medical imaging pipelines. On this slide, I have put the three types of perturbation that we talked about side by side so you can clearly see how they differ. Starting with adversarial perturbation, these come from carefully engineered changes, usually crafted using model gradients. They are intentional and they are designed specifically to fool the AI. What's striking is that the changes are almost invisible to us, but the model gets tricked and makes wrong predictions with very high confidence. Next, Gaussian noise. This is very different because it comes from natural sources like sensor variation, transmission artifacts, or compression. It isn't deliberate. Instead, it introduces random pixel fluctuations that reduce clarity. For the model, the result is a gradual performance decline. Typically, sensitivity stays high, but specificity collapses, meaning the model starts overcalling positives. The third one is resolution loss. This one is especially common in real medical imaging. It happens when we downsample or compress an image or when imaging systems are low resolution. Unlike adversarial attacks, this isn't malicious. It's simply a byproduct of data handling. But the effect is that fine details get blurred away. For the model, performance steadily drops, especially specificity because it loses access to the subtle diagnosis cues it needs. So in summary, adversarial perturbations are invisible but intentional. Gaussian noise is random and natural, and resolution loss is unintentional but very common. Each one affects model differently. Now that we've seen how different perturbations affect model performance, the key question is how do we defend against them? Starting with adversarial perturbations, one of the most effective models is adversarial training. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Nasheen.
Can we, sorry, do you mind if we just ask if there's any questions before you get into the second half?
Yeah, sure.
Just because that was a lot of content.
Yeah.
So we might want to ask just a few questions for clarification before you go into the solutions, okay?
Yes, for
You
sure,
don't-
yeah.
It's interesting, like I always have the pleasure of, talking about concepts, right? Like that's what I literally go around the world talking about. But I'll tell you, what Nushin has just presented is probably some of the most impactful challenges that you are going to have to deal with as an engineer. So, if you were dozing off there and kind of thinking, I don't need to know this, you couldn't be more wrong. So this is what you deal with in medical imaging more than anything else, is the quality of your images, how consistent they are across your entire data set, and how you deal with it, which is what Nusheen's going to talk to you about, is going to be the most impactful thing that you're going to have to deal with as an engineer. So I just thought I'd pause for a second because it really is important. Okay, understanding the differences between adversarial attacks, maybe less so. Okay, we're not worried about people trying to hack into CT machines to try and trick an algorithm. Although it has come out in the news as a risk, come on. Like seriously, I don't think it's a big problem, right? But it's interesting. And the reason we study it, and that's something I'll ask Nusheen to comment on after she gives you the solutions, is why would we be interested in adversarial attacks on medical imaging? It's because we use it as a tool to learn more about how to deal with imaging, right? To make algorithms more robust, right? So she'll comment on that. But in terms of noise, in terms of Gaussian noise versus, upscaling or the problem of downsampling is huge. It's a huge problem because all of you are going to be given images that you have to fit into a model, right? And you'll see that there's a specific size that needs to go into a model. So unless you are skilled enough to change the initial layers of an architecture, to change the input size of an image, which can be done, you're going to change the size of your image. And when you do that, unless you're going from very large to very small, which there is loss, but it's not that bad. If you're going up, it's a huge problem. Okay? So does anybody have any questions before we move through on any of this? No? So I'll just ask Nusheen first and foremost, because I'm not sure if everyone got, when you're dealing with adversarial perturbations, how are you actually obtaining those images?
Okay, so we can just use the gradient to just simulate them. Use the gradient of the loss function and then multiply it by epsilon value and then add it to the image.
Right, so are you recreating an image?
Actually, yes, we are creating a new image, a perturbated image by by considering the gradient of the image and then adding a value to it. And then, yeah.
Right. So is it a form of generative AI, or are you actually just modifying an existing image?
It's actually modifying an existing image. Yeah.
Thank you. So I wasn't sure, just because last time you presented, you talked all about wonderful work in generative AI, and I just wanted to make sure everyone was clear on the difference of what you're doing in terms of modification of images. So that's great. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so, yeah, sorry.
All these adversarial perturbations that we talk about are engineering.
Yes.
Right. So let's see an example as you like chest X-ray that you using. So when the chest X-ray is being taken, so there must be, because of the other Gaussian molecules also must be present.
Yep.
Because of the thermal or any other
Sure.
mechanical, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate them?
You don't. So exactly. So that's where, yep.
AI can be misunderstanding those things. I
No. No. So we'll make that clear. That's why I'm pausing right now. So Nusheen, I don't know if you heard the question. Where is the mic actually? Oh, it's over here. So Nusheen, I don't know if you heard the question, but the question was how do we make the difference between adversarial attacks and Gaussian noise for an image that's coming off the CT scanner?
Okay, so you mean when we look at the image or?
Well, yeah, exactly. When we're processing the images afterwards, the concern is that we have both, right? Adversarial, possibly adversarial attacks as well as Gaussian noise. And your question is, how do we deal with that, correct? How do we differentiate between the two if they're both in the image at the same time.
And
Correct?
why do you need it actually? If it is engineered,
Yeah.
then why do you have to do it?
So why are you introducing noise?
Yes.
No, you're not. This whole talk is on how to deal with existing noise. We're not introducing it. But
Intentional changes, as you say, that intentional changes.
so adversarial attacks are intentional changes, correct? And that's what I just said, that that's not a reality. So that is, in the sense that it's been brought up in the news, that if someone wanted to create a problem for an existing algorithm, even as Nusheen said, even FDA approved algorithms, you can. So why would you? You wouldn't. It'd be silly, right? Why would you want to do that? So no, not intentionally, for sure. I mean, unless it's nefarious, right? Unless you want to discredit the software by saying, wow, look how terrible your software is. It doesn't work. Or getting the wrong reading for someone's chest X-ray. So you would not expect it at all. But the reason we're bringing it up is because it's very interesting. And it's also a way of assessing a form of noise that exists, but it's a systematic noise as opposed to a random noise, right? So random noise is Gaussian. You're assuming a Gaussian distribution. But for adversarial attacks, it's systematic. It's a bias. Like you're actually biasing on purpose to shift the decision, right, of your algorithm inappropriately, like wrongly. So that's the reason we're bringing it up, because it's interesting. It's not something that you're probably going to ever address as an engineer, I hope, right? But you may consider it as a tool, right, to see how you can make your algorithm more robust, more generalizable. Because by studying adversarial attacks, you're actually looking at how you can modify your image in such a way that you're going to disrupt the ability of the algorithm to make a decision. So then you can retrain your algorithm, taking that into account, and then your algorithm will not be susceptible to adversarial attack. You see what I'm saying? So that's what the purpose is. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's a great question, because that's what I was concerned about. I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what we're doing. Yeah. So Gaussian noise and blur, that's a reality. Like that's an absolute reality, and you have to deal with it all the time. The adversarial attack in this presentation would be more seen as a tool, right? As the ability to better learn how your algorithm works, what it's detecting, and how it's perturbed, like how it's caused, how easy it is for it to make a decision. Okay, you can imagine that if the decision to be made is extremely easy, then it is going to be extremely difficult to perturb the algorithm. Does that make sense? The more difficult it is to make a decision, the easier it is to fool it, or to cause more noise or whatever that's going to make it more difficult to learn. The last thing I'll say, and I'll let Nusheen then go into the solutions, is what the comment she made, which is right on, and that is you don't lose as much sensitivity and you lose specificity. That's seen very often. So you have to be very careful unless you're expecting an accuracy of 99%, right? If you have an algorithm that's 99% accurate, the chances of having a big difference between sensitivity and specificity is basically zero, right? Because you have an accuracy of 99%. But if you are saying, oh, you know what, I've only got 80% accuracy, but that's okay. This is an early algorithm, or that's good enough for us. That's when you can be in big trouble, because if you don't look into the diagnostic, you don't look into your confusion matrix or your contingency table, whatever you want to call it, you could be in trouble, because you can have an extremely high sensitivity and a low specificity that's going to come to an accuracy of 80%, and that's where you have to worry. Exactly what Nusheen's saying is that maybe the algorithm is just guessing, and it's just choosing to guess right. Okay, so that was a very good comment of Nusheen's to give you a little bit of a heads up to be careful in those respects. Nusheen, thank you very much for humoring me on the break, and please do continue.
Okay, sure.
Uh, you can continue.
Maybe she's.
Now that we've seen how different perturbations affect model performance, the key question is how do we defend against them? Starting with adversarial perturbations, one of the most effective models is adversarial training. This means we include adversarially perturbated images in the training set so that the model learns to resist them. Another approach is robust optimization, where we modify the loss function so the model penalizes adversarial directions. Robust optimization changes the training objective so the model isn't just learning from clean images, but also learning to resist the worst case perturbations. That way, adversaries can't exploit the model's gradient as easily. This makes the gradients less exploitable and increase stability. For Gaussian noise, we rely on methods that make the model resilient to randomness. One is using denoising autoencoders, which reconstruct clean images from noisy input. Another is noise-aware training, where we inject noise during training so the model learns to handle it naturally when it encounters it later. Finally, for resolution loss, the defenses are quite different. We can use super resolution models, which take low resolution inputs and upscale them into higher resolution image and recover fine feature before classification. Another strategy is pre-training on low-resolution data. If we expose the model to degraded inputs during training, it adapts and performs better in real-world scenarios where image quality is not perfect. So each perturbation type requires a different line of defense. Adversarial needs robustness, noise needs denoising, and resolution loss needs feature recovery. Even with defense in place, deploying AI in healthcare requires a broader view of safety. First, we have the risk of hidden failure under adversarial attacks. A model might perform well in testing, but completely fail in the wild if someone applies an invisible attack. The solution is robustness testing before deployment, simulating attacks to make sure the model is resistant. Second, there is over-reliance on predictions. Clinicians may trust the AI too much without questioning it. The mitigation here is transparency, making clear what the model can and cannot do and where its limitations lie. Third, we face unclear accountability. If an AI makes a wrong prediction, who is responsible? The developer, the hospital, or the clinician? The solution is to have defined regularity and ethical framework that clearly assign responsibility. Finally, many models suffer from uninterpretable decisions. If the AI gives an answer without reasoning, clinicians may be reluctant to trust it. Here we can use tools like GradCam and explainability frameworks to show that what the model focused on when making its decision. Together, these strategies ensure that the AI isn't just accurate in the lab, but also safe, trustworthy, and ethically deployed in real-world health. So, any question before going to the solo? So, no question.
No.
Okay.
So, in this slide and next two ones, I explain pseudocodes for implementation of each perturbation. I begin with the adversarial perturbation example using FGSM. First, I set the model into evaluation mode using model.eval. This ensures that no layers like dropout or batch normalization will change during the forward pass. I then load the chest X-ray image along with its label. Importantly, I mark the image tensor, which requires grad equal to true, because without this, the gradients with respect to the image will not be captured, and FGSM relies on those gradients. Next, I run a forward pass through the model with output equal to model image and compute the standard cross entropy loss against the true data. After that, I call loss backward, which backward against the gradient all the way to the input image. The adversarial perturbation is then created with epsilon multiplied image grad sign. Here, epsilon is set to 0.006, a very small value that controls how much the image will be changed. Multiplying by the sign of the gradient means that each pixel is nudged in the direction that increases the loss the most. The perturbated image is obtained by adding the perturbation back to the original and clamp the result between 0 and 1 to ensure the pixel values remain valid. I then fed this adversarial image back into the model, take the new prediction using argmax, and finally visualize the GradCam heatmap. Typically, even though the adversarial image looks almost identical to human eye, the GradCam shows the model's attention shifting to irrelevant regions, leading to misclassification. Next, I move to Gaussian noise. Again, I load the crane image. This time, instead of computing gradients, I simply add random noise drawn from a normal distribution. I define the mean as 0 and the standard deviation as zero point 0.1. With torch.normal, I sample pixel-wise noise and add it to the image, followed by clamping so values remain in the valid range. This simulates real-world conditions such as sensor noise or compression artifacts. I then pass the noisy image through the model, extract the predicted class, oh, and visualize the GradCam. The important thing to highlight here is that the difference compared to FGSM is shown. Gaussian noise produces unstructured perturbation, so the model's performance degrades gradually as the noise level increases. Often, specificity collapses faster than sensitivity, which means the model starts overcalling positives. This matches clinical intuition when details are washed out and the model tends to see disease where there is none. Finally, I explain resolution loss. I again load the image and reduce its resolution. I set a scale factor of 0.3, which means the image is shrunk to about 30% of its size using bilinear interpolation. This process throws away high frequency information such as fine texture and edges. I then immediately upscale the image back to the original resolution, but the lost details are gone forever, leaving a blurred appearance. The torch dot clamp ensures that pixel values remain within 0 and 1. Running this low-resolution version through the model shows how performance declines when the input has less details. GradCam visualization usually show that the model still finds relevant regions, but with less precision. Compared to adversarial noise, decline is much milder and more aligned with what is visually obvious. On this slide, I am showing how decision-making changes under different perturbations using GradCam visualizations. Let's start with the adversarial case. Here, adversarial noise causes the most severe shift in attention maps. You can see that in the original image, the model's attention is concentrated on the lung fields, where pneumonia is present. But after applying adversarial perturbation, the attention wrongly shifts to the upper chest and background. This misdirection is strong enough to flip the model's prediction completely, from pneumonia to normal, even though to the human eye the image looks unchanged. This illustrates the danger of adversarial noise. It produces confident misclassification without visible alternation. Next, if we look at the second row, Gaussian noise, the effect is milder. The model's attention map shows only a small amount of scatter, and it continues to focus on the correct anatomical region. The prediction remains the same. This tells us that Gaussian noise introduces variability but doesn't fundamentally misdirect the model. It still looks at the lines where it should, though confidence may decrease as noise increases. Finally, the third row with resolution loss, we see a different pattern. When the image is downsampled and upsampled, the attention does shift and become blurred or displaced. The model still predicts correctly. It still calls pneumonia when pneumonia is present, but the interpretability of the heat map weakens. In practice, this means the model is less precise in highlighting the exact structure, which makes it hard to trust or explain the decision, even if the output label is right. So overall, adversarial perturbations are the most dangerous because they misdirect and change the outcome. Gaussian noise produces predictable scatter without flipping the label, and resolution loss mostly keeps predictions correct but degrades the interpretability of the explanation. This table summarizes the comparative impact of three types of perturbation: adversarial noise, Gaussian noise, and resolution loss on model performance. Starting with SSIM versus accuracy, adversarial perturbations are striking because they cause a sharp drop in accuracy even when the structural similarity is extremely high. around 0.998. That means the image looks almost identical to the human eye, yet the model completely fails. In contrast, Gaussian noise show a more gradual drop in accuracy as SSIM decreases. Resolution loss degrades performance as well, but it tends to be milder and only becomes serious when SSIM falls below about zero point 0.8. Looking at sensitivity, adversarial perturbation causes moderate declines, while Gaussian noise allows sensitivity to stay high even when SSIM is low. In other words, the model still catches positives. Resolution loss keeps sensitivity relatively stable as well, which means the model doesn't easily miss disease in those conditions. Specificity tells a different story. Adversarial perturbations sharply reduce specificity, leading to many false predictions. Gaussian noise also significantly reduces specificity, causing model to overcall pneumonia. Resolution loss reduces specificity too, but the decline is more gradual and less severe. For interpretability, adversarial perturbations are the most misleading. The grad cam often shift attention away from the relevant anatomical regions into the background. With Gaussian noise, grad cam shifts slightly but is still somewhat interpretable. Under resolution loss, the focus becomes more diffuse, but the model is still looking at generally reasonable regions. Finally, in terms of clinical risk, adversarial perturbation carry the highest danger because they can cause outright misdiagnosis while the image looks normal to the human eye. Gaussian noise poses moderate risk, mostly from overcalling disease in noisy scans. Resolution loss has the lowest clinical risk since it produces a gradual loss of detail but still gives results that are manageable and interpretable. Now I'm gonna shift to the next part. So if you have any question, I would be happy to answer.
No, I think we're good, Nusheen, because if you could just get through this and then we'll do questions together.
Okay, sounds good.
Does that sound good?
Sounds good, yeah. So, okay. Up until now, we have looked at how different perturbation like adversarial noise, Gaussian noise, and resolution loss can impact AI performance and interpretability. In the next section, I want to shift focus to a very practical medical application, improving ultrasound AI for detecting synovial hypertrophy. This is an area where image quality and robustness matter enormously because synovial thickening can be subtle and early detection is crucial for preventing long-term joint damage. So let's see how this concept translates into real-world ultrasound imaging. What is synovial hypertrophy? Synovial hypertrophy is the thickening of the synovial membrane, which is the soft tissue lining inside the joint. This thickening is most often caused by chronic inflammation, commonly seen in arthritis and autoimmune disease. Detecting it early is very important because it can prevent joint erosion and long-term disability. That's why rheumatologists consider synovial hypertrophy one of the key indicators of diagnosing synovitis and for monitoring how the disease progresses over time. Now, if we look at the figure on the bottom left, This shows the knee joint anatomy. We can see the femur, patella, tibia, and fibula. And in between is the synovial membrane highlighted. This gives you a sense of where exactly this tissue is located in the body. On the right-hand side, the two circular diagram compare a normal joint and a joint with synovitis. In the normal joint, the synovial membrane is thin and the joint space is filled with healthy synovial fluid. In synovitis, the synovial membrane is swollen and inflamed, and you can even see bone erosion starting to occur. So together, these images emphasize both the anatomy of synovial membrane and how inflammation changes its appearance, which is exactly what we want to detect with AI in ultrasound. Here we can see how synovial hypertrophy looks on musculoskeletal ultrasound, on the scale ultrasound. On ultrasound, the synovium appears as a hypoechoic region. That means it shows up darker than the surrounding tissue. And when it becomes abnormal, it looks thicker than expected within the joint space. The image on the left is the raw ultrasound scan, where you can see the joint structure and the darker region in the middle. The image on the right highlights that same abnormal region in red, showing the extent of the thickened synovial tissue. That is what rheumatologists are looking for during ultrasound examination, and it's also what we want our AI models to recognize. Detecting this subtle dark area is crucial for diagnosing synovitis and tracking disease activity. Now, why does synovial hypertrophy matter so much in the context of AI models? The first reason is that it is often very subtle. The thickened synovium can blend into the surrounding tissue, which makes it difficult even for human experts to spot. The subtlety creates a real challenge for AI systems as well. Second is that musculoskeletal ultrasound has big advantages clinically. It's non-invasive, it's portable, and it's relatively cost-effective compared to other imaging modalities like MRI. That's why it's widely used in hematology. But at the same time, ultrasound image quality can be variable, and that variability limits diagnostic performance. So, because of both the severity of disease and the variability in image quality, AI models have to be trained very carefully. They need robust feature extraction and good resolution in order to minimize false negatives. In other words, to avoid missing cases of synovial hypertrophy that could have important consequences for patient management. One of the major challenges in detecting synovial hypertrophy is that it becomes much harder to see when the ultrasound image is blurry. The thickened synovium is already a subtle finding, and if the image quality is degraded, it blends even more into the background tissue. This is a big problem for AI as well. Standard convolutional neural networks struggle when the input quality is low. They rely heavily on edge and texture information, and blur tends to wash out those fine details. On the right, you can see examples of knee ultrasound image with different levels of blur. At the top, with sigma equal to zero point 0.5, the structures are still fairly well defined. By the middle image at sigma 1.5, you can see that the details are starting to soften. And at the bottom, with sigma 2.5, the image becomes quite hazy, making it very difficult to pick out the synovium. This is where deblurring methods come in. By restoring sharp structure to the image, we can make the synovium more visible, which is in turn improve the ability of AI models to detect and classify it correctly. Deblurring is not just about cosmetic improvements, it directly translates into better diagnostic accuracy. This work that I'm gonna present in next slide was done by Catherine Guab, one of the ROP students in our lab that was accepted to the RSNA conference, a leading conference in the clinical field of medical imaging with a highly selective acceptance rate. This slide shows the method that was used, which we call DBLUR-MIM, that stands for deblurring with masked image modeling. The core idea is to pre-train a network to take a blurry ultrasound image and learn how to reconstruct sharper ones. The pipeline works in four main steps. First, we intentionally blur the input image. Then we apply masking, which hides portion of the image to force the model to learn contextual structure. Next, the encoder processes this corrupted image representation. Finally, the model reconstructs the sharper, more detailed versions of the input. Through this process, the model gradually learns the mapping between blurry inputs and their sharp. What makes this powerful is that the encoder trained in this way can be transferred to downstream tasks such as classification. In other words, instead of starting from scratch, we can take the pre-trained encoder, which already understands how to restore structure from noisy or degraded ultrasound, and plug it into a classification network. At the bottom, you can see this in equation format. An image X is blurred into XP that goes through a vision transformer encoder, which produces a latent representation H. Then an MLP or multilayer perceptron maps that representation to the final prediction Y. So development is not only about image enhancement, it's a way of creating stronger feature representation that directly improves diagnostic performance in the classification stage. This slide summarizes the classification results when we compare baseline CNN against the Develer-MIM approach. If we look first at accuracy, the baseline CNN reaches about 71.5%, while Develer-MIM improves this to 79.4%. Similarly, the area under the curve, AUC, which captures overall discriminative ability, raises from 80.9% with the baseline to 87.3% with the Belormi. The most important difference, though, is in sensitivity. The baseline CNN has a sensitivity of only 58%, which means it misses a lot of positive cases of synovial hypertrophy. Development pushes this up to 80.2%, a very substantial improvement. Clinically, this matters a lot because missing thickened synovium would lead to underdiagnosing and delayed treatment. There's a small trade-off in specificity, which drops from 84.7% with baseline CNN to 78.8% with Development. But this trade-off is acceptable in the context because in rheumatology, musculoskeletal ultrasound sensitivity is more critical. We'd rather overcall and check further than miss patients who actually have disease. So overall, development provides a clear benefit. It improves general performance, especially sensitivity, which is the most clinically relevant metric here. This slide shows how performance change as the blur level increases, comparing the baseline CNN against development. With mild blur at sigma 0.5, the baseline CNN achieves about 69.6% accuracy. Development, in contrast, was much higher at 79.6. When we increase blur to sigma 1.5, the baseline CNN drops to 67.9%, while development remains steady at 79.2%. Even at heavy blur, sigma 2.5, the baseline falls further to 65.6%, but development still retains 77.3 accuracy. The key takeaway is that development is much more robust under blur, while the baseline CNN degrades quickly as image quality worsens. Development maintains relatively stable performance even at higher blur levels. This matters clinically because ultrasound images in real-world settings are often less than ideal. A model that remains reliable under blur is much more practical and trustworthy in daily use. On this slide, I'm showing examples of model explainability using GradCam. GradCam highlights where the model is focusing its attention when it makes a prediction. Let's look at the positive case in the top row. On the left, you see the original ultrasound image, and on the right is the GradCam heat map. With development, the focus is concentrated on the joint region where the synovium actually lies. This is exactly where we want the model to be paying attention. Now, if we move to the negative case in the bottom row, you can see the problem. Instead of attending to the joint structure, the attention map highlights mostly the black background above the knee. This is an example of misfocus explanation. In fact, this behavior is very similar to what the baseline CNN often did. It tended to look at irrelevant background regions instead of the anatomy. So, the key message from this slide is that development focus more on relevant anatomy, while the baseline CNN often misfocus on background. That means development not only improves performance metrics, but also makes the model's reasoning process more interpretable and trustworthy for clinicians. This slide addresses the statistical significance of the gains observed with development. We used bootstrapping, which means repeatedly resample the folds with replacement to estimate the confidence intervals of the accuracy improvement compared to the baseline CNN. This approach is useful because it doesn't assume a specific distribution and gives a more robust estimate of uncertainty. The results show that the 95% confidence interval for the improvement ranges from about 3.5% to 11.6%. In other words, we can be quite confident that development doesn't just improve by chance. The improvement is considered positive across resampled dataset. The histogram here shows the bootstrap distribution. Most of the sampled improvements cluster around 7 to 8%. And importantly, the entire confidence interval lies above zero, meaning there is no overlap with no improvement. Also, a statistical test was run, and the p-values show that less than 0.001. This confirms that the observed performance gains are statistically significant. So overall, we can say that learning provides a reliable, statistically validated improvement in accuracy, not just a one-off effect from this data set. Thank you for your attention. So I have walked you through how perturbation can impact AI models and then show how the double learning approach improves ultrasound AI performance for detecting synovial hypertrophy with better sensitivity, more robust performance under blur, and more interpretable attention maps. So I would happy to take any question, and also here is my email if you would like to follow up later.
Thanks, Nusheen. That was fantastic. Yes, let's open it up for questions. Does anybody like to go more detail on any of this? Yes, we have a question.
This synovial atrophy, how this revealed as a change in size or texture, how exactly can be detected in ultrasound?
So you're referring to a clinical perspective, like how are we detecting, so the algorithm or the human?
But after the imaging.
Yes, after imaging, yeah.
So what features we can expect to detect that?
So currently, I mean, the expert is, sonographer or, whoever, rheumatologist or radiologist that's assessing it. They're doing it by visual inspection, correct? So they're trained to detect it. So the algorithm, the way it's working now, and that was the challenge, is the expert will mask the area, and then you're absolutely right. The texture within that area is going to be assessed by the algorithm. But exactly as we saw, unfortunately, if it's a little, not little, if it's blurry, that impacts the ability of the algorithm to detect. And so by deblurring, we're improving performance. So you're right on. Yeah, absolutely. It's texture, which is it's tricky. I think it's synovium. It's not an easy thing to detect on the ultrasound, and a lot of it is to do with the actual image you're looking at, right? Because it comes from a cine, and so on the various frames, you can more or less see it.
Very challenging.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very tricky. But it's very important. It's an important area for all, whether it be hemophilia or arthritis or rheumatology. It's definitely something that they're very interested in knowing for sure. Thank you. Sorry, I took that one, Nusheen, because I knew it was kind of more of a clinical question. Any other questions? No, anybody? So, Nusheen, that was great. Thank you, and I think that's a nice story, right? So, can you tie it in a little bit with your first part of the presentation in terms of what you showed here was deblurring, correct? So, what kind of blurring here are you referring to when you are working with thick synovium?
Yeah, for deblurring here. You mean I explain the method?
No, just more like because you see, your first part of the presentation was adversarial, and then you had, your blurring, right, due to various, Gaussian noise versus downsampling or upsampling. So in this case, what's the blurring resulting from? Like what you would
So blurring was actually, the blur image was obtained by adding a Gaussian noise to the image. So here we saw some examples. of the images that were actually perturbated by the Gaussian noise. So in order to actually return and make a robust model, we intentionally add Gaussian noise to the input image and make the images blurry. And then in the next step, we actually hide some part of it, and then we give it to the encoder, and the algorithm tries to reconstruct the fine details from the noisy image.
So this was Gaussian noise that was introduced, correct?
Yeah.
So if you were to use upsampling as a way of blurring, right, so loss of resolution, do you think your result could you do the same?
I think here it's a bit tricky, because if we use the resolution loss, because actually the Tiken synovium has several features. So if we do upsampling and then actually downsampling and does upsampling, so it's possible that our results will not be very good, because the model actually loses the fine details forever. But when we have the Gaussian noise, although the fine structure is faded, but they exist and we can retrain it. But with downsampling and upsampling, they will gone forever. So I guess the results will not be as good as this one. It's more tricky and challenging.
So there is definitely, so if you could comment a little bit on a very common problem, and that is upsampling, right? So if you, let's say you have images that are given to you that are 50 by 50, and you need to feed in, 256 by 256 into your model, you're going to upscale, correct, from 50 to 256, and that's going to be a big problem for your model, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you take what you've just, actually you have a perfect slide up there. So if you were to encode, to use an encoder decoder, but you were to simply encode at 50, and then when you decode it, you decode it at a larger resolution. What would you say to that? Because I know that that's being done currently in order to try and deal with imaging that comes in too small.
Yes. What we can do, instead of doing just upsampling and downsampling, I pad the image. I mean, I make the image, for example, I pad it to make it, for example, a square. So this causes that the structure and the fine details be kept by padding the image, which means that, for example, adding black pixels surrounding the image, and then I do, for example, upsampling. By doing this, the fine structures are kept in the image. So if I want to do, for example, do something with resolution, first, I think doing padding is a good solution.
Okay, well, we can talk about that. Is using an encoder as well, autoencoder. Some people are actually doing that to upscale, right? So they're regenerating afterwards as a larger image after teaching it, right? The encoding. So I'm just saying it is an approach, but it's tricky. It's all easy. It's all difficult, right? I mean, if only there was an easy solution. So there are different approaches on how you can do this, and that's the joy of being an engineer. Right, so that's what you get to work with in order to be successful in your training. But that's great. Thank you, Nashid. Are there any other questions for Nashid? No, we're good. Okay, I think the room is quiet, Nashid. I think they need a break. But thank you very much, and thanks for staying up late. That's your last time you have to do that for us. But we really appreciate you joining.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much. Thanks to you, and thanks everyone for listening to my presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nashid.
Yeah, we have a
Now it's working. Fantastic. Okay. Are we hanging in there? We ready to go? It's been a long week, right? Yeah. Well, it doesn't get any easier. You get into this space, it doesn't get any easier. If only it did, right? Okay, so today we're going to continue along the theme of dealing with signal-to-noise ratio. So for those of you who have taken statistics, it's all about signal-to-noise ratio, isn't it? So before I get started, because it's a bit dense, what I'm going to talk about is a little dense, I'll try and make it as easy as possible. And it's not, when I say, or when anybody says, they'll try and make it as easy as possible, it's not patronizing, right? You have to realize that. It's just because you don't know it. So for anyone who doesn't know the material, it's difficult. So by making it easier, it's just an introduction, a way of getting you into the material, right? So never be offended as a student or as a faculty if someone is making something easier for you. It's nothing personal. So this is work that my PhD student is doing. So she's in the Department of Statistical Sciences, okay? So she is not a machine learner. She's not a medical scientist. She's a statistician. And she's doing her PhD in statistics, but inevitably, because she's doing it with me, it crosses over into the world of medical imaging, okay? But before I get started, let's talk a little bit about statistics. So what is the purpose of statistics? Why do we need statistics? We kind of touched on it earlier on in the week. So why do we need statistics? I know you guys are all looking down. This is exactly like when I teach statistics. Nobody wants to answer. But why do we need it? Who here has done statistics for their degree or for their work or for anything? Okay, wow, I'm going to say many of you, most of you have probably done it, but you just didn't know. Okay? So for those of you that said they did statistics, I believe you. I'm sure you did statistics because you're aware that you had to do them for your project, right? But for the rest of you, do any of you deal with data? Measures. Does any of your work deal with measures? Something you measure, a numeric measure, a proportion. Any of your work? So now put up your hand if any time in your life you've had to deal with numeric data, with data. So you know the difference between a data and a single measurement, right? So meaning you have multiple measures, you have a whole pool of data. Now put your hand up if you've had to deal with that kind of data. Okay, so if you're not putting your hand up, it's because you're asleep, or you still don't understand what I'm trying to say about data. So in your daily lives, you deal with statistics, you just don't know it. Okay? So every time you talk about you wouldn't even say, let's say we don't even say a mean. Let's say an average. An average is statistics. If you ask somebody, what's the biggest in that? Is that statistics? It is. Because what is meant by the biggest? What does that imply? The biggest. What do you need to know in order to give me that answer? Yeah. You need to know the rest. So you need to know the distribution. Correct? Okay. So if you know the distribution, it means that you know the full range between the smallest and the largest, and you know the frequency of those values, large and small, across your distribution.
And if you have what's called a Gaussian distribution, which was described by Frederick Gauss, that's why it's called Gaussian. There's no special anything about that. It's just someone's name. Okay? Frederick Gauss. So he described the normal distribution. So a normal distribution is the one that all of you know, and you should know, especially if you're data scientists, which is you have two tails, the minimum and the maximum, right? And in the middle is your mean, your median, and your mode, and they're all the same. Okay? That's a very specific distribution that's key to pretty much everything we do. So, and I'm not going to go into the difference, I'm not going to kill you guys on statistics, but I just want to introduce you to the idea that you deal with statistics all the time. So what if you do not know the distribution? Is that a problem giving me the answer of the maximum? If you don't know the distribution, you don't know the distribution. Can you still give me the maximum? So how could you give me the maximum if you do not know the distribution? There's only one way. And what's that? If you don't know the distribution, you don't know it's normally distributed, how could you find the maximum? Don't be fooled into thinking this is a complex answer. It is not. But how do you know? What do you mean higher values? Yeah, but how do you know it's the maximum? Comparison to who? Ah! That's it. That's the only way you're going to know, is if you have all the values, right? And you rank them. You sort them, and you find the maximum and the minimum. But what if you have the population of India? Are you going to have all the values? You're not, right? I mean, you could try, but I suspect you're not going to get all the values. Correct? So then how do you get it then? How do you get it? Yes, exactly. So there's statistics. If you do not have the entire sample, then you need to find a way to estimate that distribution. That is inferential statistics. That's statistics, okay? So just describing your data, that's part of statistics, but that's called descriptive statistics. But if you want to learn about your distribution and perform what is called expectation, then you move to the next level and you're performing inferential statistics. So random sampling is how you do that. You take a representative sample from your population and you measure that. And that's from that sample you're going to infer the greater population. And obviously the larger your sample, the closer you will get to your full population. And there's also another theorem called the central limit theorem, which says that if you sample repeatedly, right, then you're going to get a better estimate of your true mean of the population. Okay? So that's statistics. So why do I bring this up? Because all of this noise stuff and signal to noise and everything we do relies heavily on it. Okay? And when you're going to be dealing in our world of medical imaging, you can't ignore statistics. So as an engineer, you want to, because all of you didn't put your hand up, right? You desperately want to, but you shouldn't. Okay? And you're not going to be tested on statistics. No one's going to test you on statistics, right? You're not in my class, right? So don't be afraid to learn a little bit more about statistics because it will help you in your job. Okay? So what am I talking today? I'm talking to you today about data heterogeneity, all right? And the reason we're interested in it is because data heterogeneity impacts model performance. So your job as an engineer, you're trying to, develop the best model possible. But unfortunately, it's not an easy task. So I won't even go there. So what I would like to help you perceive is, what do I mean by that? Okay? So let's say I need to pick out somebody wearing a red shirt in this classroom. Would it be easier to pick out that red shirt if everybody in the classroom except for that one person with a red shirt is wearing a white shirt versus everybody in the classroom wearing different colored shirts except for one person who has a red shirt? So which is the easier task? Well, yeah, duh, right? I mean, you guys obviously figure that out. But that's the difference between heterogeneous data and homogeneous data. If it's homogeneous, it's much easier to pick out the signal. If it is heterogeneous, it is much more difficult for your algorithm to pick out what you're looking for. So intuitively, if you have heterogeneous data, it's going to be more work for the algorithm. And more work for the algorithm means you need more data. It needs to learn from more data. Because you have to remember, an algorithm is not guessing. It's not estimating. It's actually iteratively going through all your samples. Like literally, it's going through all of your samples, one by one, not by one. And usually they're in batches. But they're going through all of your images. And not only that, but it's going through multiple what's called epochs, or epochs, depends on wherever you're pronouncing it from, right? But that means you're going through the full data, and then you're going through it again, full data, and then you're going through it again. Typically, I don't know, 50, 80 epochs. I mean, if you're really lucky, you might get away with 30. So that's why it's so computer intensive. But just imagine, it's going through every single image. And it does not understand the difference between two images. Because in terms of pixels, they're different. And so that's why, if you have heterogeneous data, it's more work for the algorithm to understand all of those different images. Okay? So that's the purpose of trying to understand if data is heterogeneous or not. Unfortunately, what transpires when you're developing your models is you just try. You just give it a go, right? I mean, everybody does. Even my lab does, right? You just try. You just, oh, okay, well, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to try it again. I'm going to optimize. I'm going to change the hyperparameters. I'm going to try a different model. I'm going to try different data. I'm going to split it different. I'm going to do cross-validation. I'm not going to do cross-validation, right? There's so many different ways of giving it a go. And you empirically stumble across the best model. Really. That is how it works. Right? It's no dark secret I'm sharing with you guys. That's how all labs work. And if they say it differently, they're kind of lying to you. Okay? So, is that a bad thing? No. I mean, but realize it's empirical. You're trying and trying and trying. So it would be nice to maybe get a little guidance, right? To kind of get an idea that, ooh, you know, my data is actually heterogeneous. I can measure that, and therefore I can expect challenges. And maybe I should consider this model that I've used in the past that's done extremely well with heterogeneous data in ultrasound. Okay? That's the goal. So what do we do? General definition, basically I just went over it. Statistical evidence, dissimilarity or diversity among elements, whatever you would like it to be, pixels in our case, that make up a collective data set. So this is just a visual representation of exactly what I just said, multiple colors, right? Interestingly here, if you're all seated, there's a spatial arrangement. This one doesn't give one. This looks pretty random, right? But just that, keep in mind. And then you can look at standard deviation by groups, right? So there's just an idea of getting into this world of heterogeneity, which we're going to talk about, okay? So why can data be heterogeneous? We've talked about it all week, so this is nothing new, all right? Data collection methods. The way you collect your data can introduce heterogeneity. Oops. Think of that. Because very often, when the data gets to you, the engineer, it's too late. You don't know. You may not even know how that data was collected if you don't ask. Right? If you ask your user, then you're going to know. But if you don't ask, you won't know. And so will there be heterogeneity? If you don't know, is there still heterogeneity in the data? Yes. Okay? You can stick your head in the sand like an ostrich all you want. It's not going to change the outcome. Okay. Data storage systems can also introduce heterogeneity. Be careful about that. So how your data is stored. We actually talked about it this morning. Who here thinks that data natively captured by any device is stored the same way? Do you think all systems store the data the same way? So what do you think happens and you don't even know about it? Compression. Happens all the time. All the time. And unless you specifically ask, you say, hey, don't compress my data, thank you very much. I need the raw data. They will, because the IT group is not necessarily working with you. They're working for the hospital that's storing your data, and they have a mandate. They only have so much money to store petabytes of data, so they compress it. So be aware of that. So that's where here, data storage systems, if you have some hospitals that don't compress their data or compress it only a little bit, another hospital compresses it a lot, well, when you receive the data, it may be uncompressed, right? It was retrieved. Because you got to remember that's what happens a lot too, right? It gets archived, right? It gets compressed in an archive and then it's regenerated. Right? So be aware of that. That's a possibility, right? So that could change your data. Nature of data, of course. So that's the big one, is the type of data you have, right? So tumors, are you looking at tumors, types of tumors, different size tumors, location of tumors? Like you just have data, like that's key, definitely. And then data integration, so we kind of talked about that when you're merging stuff and data, you know, like if you have different types of data and you're doing multimodal and blah, 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 just imagine in the latent space how complex that is, right? So there's data heterogeneity. Okay. So this is kind of an easy one. You can't see the color too much, but these squares here are orange. So this is just a very, very easy, you know, demonstration that, what do you think that is? That's homogeneous, right? There's a tiny little square that's orange, but in general, it's all blue. So that's homogeneous. How about this one? That's more heterogeneous data, right? So there's different types of data. Now the only thing is, what you see here is what? A pattern. So could this data be more heterogeneous? Yes, absolutely. If you take away the pattern, it would be even more heterogeneous. Okay? So this is very homogeneous, and because of it, we have a new problem. And so this one brings up the fun thing, the fun discussion, which is variation in data in general. So I remember during the earlier part of the week we talked about it. If you had no variation in data, then we'd all be twins. We'd all be identical, correct? Everything would be the same. And I wouldn't have a job as a statistician. But you do need to be careful here. Sadly. In machine learning, if the data is too homogeneous, it can actually be a problem as well, because it doesn't learn as well. It just doesn't learn as well. It's kind of like the Goldilocks syndrome. You know, you have to kind of have that sweet spot of, you know, homogeneous to heterogeneous data. But typically, because you're doing signal to noise ratio, I mean, there is going to be always a little bit, right? And so it should be okay. If generalizability is not an issue for you, then, you know, having very homogeneous data is probably going to be okay, right? But if in a clinical setting, that's just not common. And so you do want it to generalize, and if that's the case, then you will expect some variability, okay? So this is heterogeneous, and in this case, and actually worse if this was all jumbled. It's harder for the algorithm to convert, okay, because of the noise, the patterns, the conflicting patterns. This one's not necessarily too conflicting, but if you had like a big mix of it, the conflicting patterns is going to make the job for the algorithm to learn more challenging, okay? So what we're trying to do is find a sweet spot in your training, okay? And that is, and everything we've talked about so far is dealing with that challenge, right? Dealing with how do we train something successfully, considering, I don't even know if it's barriers, but it would be challenges that may exist in your data, okay? And so just remember, there are so many different contributions to heterogeneity that you need to manage it, okay? Okay, so what does heterogeneity typically do? It makes it harder to learn, and therefore, if you don't have enough data or you don't train enough, then you get a drop in accuracy, okay? Especially if you have imbalances and you have bias and everything we've talked about. We don't have to go through that again, but that's going to create a big drop in accuracy, okay? So that's the reason that you're interested in dealing with heterogeneous data. And then the easy ones, of course, is if you have easy biases that you can address, then that's pretty easy, right? You balance your data sets and everything's good, correct? Like it's pretty straightforward, right? We've done that. Okay, so class imbalance, which we've talked about at length. Feature and distribution mismatch, so that one's, we're getting into a little bit more tricky stuff, right? So that's features of your imaging that you're going to be looking at. And if you have the possibility of knowing the distributions, then you can play around with that a little bit and address heterogeneity that way. But for this workshop, the one easy one to remember is class imbalance. So make sure that your certain biases that may exist in your data set that could be related to your outcome are balanced, right? If they're not related to your outcome, is it a problem? If you have a class imbalance, let's say you're training for brain tumor, okay? And detection of brain tumor using segmentation, and you're looking for a pattern in the tumor within. Let's make it more complex. We're doing radiomics, remember? Because you guys did radiomics with Ernest. We're using radiomic features, detection, cancerous yes, no, within a brain tumor. Yeah? Okay. One of the variables in the data set is grossly imbalanced. But that, instead of it being, let's say, sex that could be related, right? Let's say there's certain patterns that are, more observed in males and females, and then you have an imbalance across who has, tumor yes, no, right? Then that could cause a problem, correct? But what if it's, what they prefer for breakfast? Like, clinically, I don't think their preference for breakfast is going to impact the tumor type in their brain, right? So if you have an imbalance in that data across who eats breakfast, who has cancer or who doesn't, I don't think breakfast preference is going to have a big impact, correct? And how many other variables could you think of like that could exist in your data set? Actually infinite, right? It's actually infinite because you don't even know. There are probably so many different things that you could describe about your patients. Habits, history, family history, lineage, where they live, what kind of pets they have, right? So is that going to impact your research? No, it's not. So you don't have to worry about those. You only need to worry about the ones that are related to your outcome. So they have to be there has to be an imbalance, and it also has to be related to your outcome. Both have to be related to your outcome. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so then what we're trying to address is how can we estimate the sample size required to do the training? So you guys, are not there yet, I'm assuming, but that's probably the number one question I get asked, hands down, by any project, period. Every time I'm brought into a new project, the first thing they ask is how much data do we need? Always. It's the first thing they ask. And I always say, as much as possible. Because that's the only answer I can give. I know for a fact, the more data you give me, the better I'm going to do. Period. For a fact. But unfortunately, it's not financial data where you have too much data. I mean, there's so much financial data, it's ridiculous. It's medical imaging data, which is very costly. It's very expensive. A CT, an MRI, they're expensive. PETs, ultrasounds less so, X-rays less so, but still, they cost money. So for them to give me hundreds of thousands of data points is prohibitively expensive. So that's the reason they ask, how many do you need? We have 100, is that enough? Well, I mean, I can give you an approx number, like minimum, like 200 to 500 per class, minimum, right? But I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. And it's because I don't appreciate the heterogeneity in the data that's related to the ROI. I just don't know that. And so that's what this is. How can we possibly get a little insight into the heterogeneity? So heterogeneity in stats or math can be measured by various means, and I'm not going to trust me, I'm not going to hurt you here. But there's kind of classic ways. Shannon entropy is probably the go-to for measuring randomness. So basically, in terms of a concept, it measures the amount of uncertainty, okay? Or randomness. Uncertainty is often related to randomness, okay? In a probability distribution. So that's the stats. Everything in stats is probability distributions, okay? But the measure of randomness within a probability distribution is going to give you an estimate of uncertainty, entropy, right? Okay. There's a couple other measures. As in anything, in all presentations, we always give you, well, there's this one, and then there's that one, and there's this one. And so, Rennie's another heterogeneity measure, and it's, it's a generalization of Shannon, So you're kind of like, why are there so many of them, right? So in statistics, there are always different measures because for all these measures, they have different assumptions, or they have different interpretation, or different meaning. So they may actually give you heterogeneity, but there's a subtle difference to it, or there's a subtle difference in the assumption. So that's how this essentially works. But for instance, this one, it emphasizes different aspects of diversity. So this one tends to be used in ecology, for instance, right? The Simpson index is, Simpson is in ecology. When you're dealing with communities and you want to calculate entropy within a community, you use Simpson, and then, Gini Simpson is an adaptation to that one, which, addresses some of the limitations of the Simpson. So there's another example of why you would calculate it differently. It's because it addresses limitations of the previous one. So you get it. I'm not here to teach you stats, but I just want to show you that there are different ways of measuring the same thing, and you need to pick the right one, just like everything, right? In this case, we're going to take it one step further. We're going to create a new one. Why use what's already there, right? No, I'm kidding. It's just so that this is more applicable to what we do in imaging, okay? So this is the heterogeneity index, the HTI, and it's a variation of the Shannon entropy. So that's why I was saying we'll just stick to Shannon. But we're just basically doing exactly what Shannon does, but we're applying it to like a space for imaging. Okay, and this was first applied to transcriptomics, and if you don't know what that is, it's basically we're looking at transcription, gene transcription. As you know, DNA is the coding, right? But it's the coding for the production, typically, of protein. And you have to go through steps. You go from your DNA to your RNA, and then the RNA is transcribed. And there's different steps like that. And so it governs where does protein get expressed in the cells in your body. Because inevitably, you don't have the same proteins expressed in every cell in your entire body, or you'd just be one big blob, right? You'd just be one big blob of cells with proteins, all the same proteins in them. That's how we differentiate, right? So expression is transcription. You're assuming that the proteins are made, but it's transcribing. It's just a way of looking at differences. And so I'll show you pictures later of how it works. But this is where it was first established, was in transcriptomics. Okay, so once again, the HTI looks at one area, and we have 3 traits. So 3 traits in genomics, right? In genes, you have 3 different traits, and they're being expressed in the same area. And what we're doing, you may not see in the color in the back, but this is all blue, this is all orange, this is all green, and then these ones here are all systematically alternated. Okay? So when you look at that, if you only look at HTI, which is the index, which looks at proportion of the traits within one given area, essentially. It captures heterogeneity at the global level, but it lacks the ability to account for local level. So that's the first concept that's a challenge here for you guys, and that is spatial resolution, location, right, of your traits. And so what's been developed, no surprise here, is we're just taking the HTI, and then we're breaking it up into a grid. You can't see the grid lines maybe in the back there. See? Okay, we're taking it and splitting it into a grid, calculating the HTI, and then taking the average. Okay? So that's one way of introducing the concept of spatial heterogeneity. Make sense? Okay. So then when you look at that, you can, this is synthetic data, of course, but what you can look at is heterogeneity maps. And in doing so, you can see here the different combinations will have varying levels of heterogeneity. So these blanks here are where there's nothing, there's no trait. And that comes in transcriptomics because if you look at it, comes from pathology. When you take a slice, a sample, tissue sample, and you put it on a slide, and then you do, staining, right? And you get the different stains. You'll have areas that just don't have cells, right, on the tissue. So that's what this represents. In our world of CT and MRI, pretty much there'll always be something, except for on the outside of, CT or MRI. But anyway, you'll see here, this has very low heterogeneity. This has higher and both are about the same. Okay, they're very heterogeneous. That makes sense, because if you look within each square, the proportion of the different traits is almost equal, right? You have a little bit of all 3. But if you look at this one, there's nothing there. But this one's all blue, right? This one's all orange. This one's all green. This one's all red, right? So then within those squares, it's homogeneous. Make sense? So if we were to apply this to MRI data, which was done, in this case, what we're doing is we're taking pixel intensity, we're setting a threshold, and for different sequences, PD versus T2, we're saying, has it matched the threshold, yes or no? So that's our trait, right? And then we're combining them to then compare it for the HTA. Okay, so instead of genetic traits, we're actually using thresholds for pixels. So what does it do? It permits us to then estimate the heterogeneity within one brain, right? So there's multiple slices of, multiple sequences for the same slice, but it's one person's brain, right? So within that brain, how much heterogeneity exists? And if you look at the sensitivity analysis, so this is to show you, because I'm sure all of you were thinking, I have a problem with my method, don't I? You get like, was I really thinking that? So the problem is, what's the number of regions? What's the number of regions? And how does the number of regions affect the calculation of my HTA? So think of it. If I only have one region, that's actually the HTI. I'm not taking the average of anything. I only have one value. It's the HTI. So is that heterogeneous, yes or no, if I only have one area? Yeah, it is heterogeneous, right? Because I have a mixture. But if I then go up to splitting it more and more and more and more, you can see that the smaller my squares become, right? What happens? What happens to the HTA? It goes down because it makes sense that if you get down to a square that's one dot, what's the color of the dot? Blue. Is that homogeneous? Yep. So then it's, right? So do you see immediately the limitation? So that's the reason it's a PhD project. If it was easy, then we'd be done. But it's not, because what we need to learn in order to make this happen is understand that relationship between the size of the grid, how we determine the traits to make the calculation, and then, we're not even done then. Let's say we do that and everything's fantastic. Then you guys are going to say, so what? Like, you give me a number, 4. Okay, it's 4. And you're going to be like, what the heck is that? What's 4? What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. So then what we need to do is associate it to learning in machine learning. So that's why it's a PhD project, because it's not easy, right? So, and then, do I really care? I mean, do I? I'm actually asking you, me personally, you know me now, I've been yapping up here all week. Would I be interested in knowing heterogeneity in one brain? Do I care? Do I care about the heterogeneity in your brain? Do I need to know that? Just one person? No, right? I need to know the heterogeneity across brains, right? Yes. So then, now we need to adapt this method to all of your brains. So now can we calculate heterogeneity across brains? So what we're going to do is these, simplistically, these grids will no longer be within a brain, they'll be across brains. Right? So we're going to, each brain is going to be an area, and then we're going to compare across brains. Because if everybody has the same brain, then it's homogeneous. Does that kind of make sense? The other challenge, of course, is going to be what do you use as a trait? So in this case, in the example of where it was used within a single brain, it was used for MRI in different sequences. Now that could work for MRI and brain sequences, right? But what if you wanted to use it in X-ray, or if you wanted to use it in video? Let's say you wanted to use it in video. You're taking frames from a video that you were recording a patient, doing a task, for instance, behavioral research. So then how do you use it then? How do you know if those video frames are heterogeneous or not? Right? That's tricky, because you're not going to use sequences for MRI, because there's no MRI, it's video. So we're using radiomics. So taking radiomics, which is the study of the distribution of your features, right? We'll use those as thresholds right? To kind of say, oh yeah, within that area, for that radiomic feature, this is the level, yes, no, or multiple class, right? And that will provide us with the traits, right, to then assess heterogeneity. But once again, there's another, ooh, I don't know if it's going to work, is what radiomic feature do you use? What kind of thresholds do you use? What's meaningful, what's not? So that's the reason, she's working years on this as a PhD. Make sense? But that's where we're going. I don't even know if it's going to work, really. Hopefully Rosa's not listening, but I mean, joking aside, that's research, right? I mean, that's why you do research. If I knew the answer, I wouldn't need a student to work on it, right? I mean, obviously we're confident, but who knows, right? And that's it for heterogeneity. Whew, we're right on time. I love it. So I think that's it for diving deep into the engineering part. And then tomorrow I get to put you to sleep with ethics and data security and all that stuff. But sadly, it's equally important, right? Because as engineers, if you don't get any data, can you do your job? If you have no data, can you do your job? No. You'd have to make it up. And then no one's going to be interested in your work because it's made up. And so if you can't get data because of the security or the privacy issues, you may as well take up another job. It's not going to work, right? So then inevitably, learning to deal with ethics and privacy is very important, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But for today, before we finish, are there any questions on data heterogeneity or the concepts of heterogeneous data? Anybody? Questions? No? We're good, yeah. I'm not too surprised. Oh, thank you. Taking pity on me, yes.
So now for patients, and you said that images will be taken. For example, you take these images present. So probably human body is different from each other,
Yeah.
The response will be different. I mean, for this PhD, whatever that will take. I do not know anything of medical investigation, just a black body. But when you talk about heterogeneity, then in case of diagnosis, don't you think it will be a big challenge?
Don't I think it will be a big...
Because to analyze, for example, I'm taking patient 1. Okay, so their images will be different. I mean, the CT, whatever their diagnosis that you look for, would be different than the other one.
Yes, it will be.
So, how this heterogeneity would be able to allow you to have a proper decision making?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That's the challenge, absolutely. So you've nailed it right on. And so the purpose of the work is to figure exactly that out. So we're going to start from very basic. So exactly as you said, one person's brain is different from another's. So if we were to just look at within that, the entire picture of that brain versus the entire picture of this brain, then that's one thing, right? That's one, if they're identical, if you look at twins, or if you look at the same person twice, there'll be no differences between them, so that's homogeneous. Because we're looking at the entire brain here, we're not looking within the brain, remember? Okay, so because if we look within the brain, then the data can be heterogeneous within a brain. Right. So in this case, we're looking between patients. So we're looking at, the comparative value is going to estimate, let's say, the entire brain. So if it, just think of it, if you get a value for one person, it's 3. Making it up, 3. And then you take that person again, same scan, what's the value going to be?
It should be.
It is 3, it's the same person. But what if you took someone else, and their value is 3? And you take someone else and it's 3. And you take everybody in this room, it's 3. That's homogeneous data, right? But if the values are now changing across people, then that's heterogeneous data. And so that's going to be, if the values are, if it's heterogeneous across everybody, then we associate it with how much does that challenge training, right? So we'll train it with homogeneous data and then varying levels of heterogeneous data. And then we measure the score of heterogeneous, the HTA across all of those. And then we measure the time and the requirements for training. And we're going to see that, you know, when I assume, you know, a homogeneous, a less heterogeneous data set is going to train with less data and quicker. And a more heterogeneous data set is going to train longer and require more data. That's literally what we're going to do. But it's not easy. Like, that makes it sound easy, isn't it? But it's not at all, because you can imagine if you're looking for a brain tumor, at that level, everybody's brain is basically the same. Yes, they're, you know, you're right. It's a little different here and there. You have different size and you have, you know, whatever. But we all have the same brain. Anatomically, it's the same. So that's homogeneous, correct? Then that's all dependent on the traits that you choose. But if you're looking at a summary value like a radiomics, probably it's going to be very similar. So then depending on where that tumor is in your image, that's where the heterogeneity is going to be, or what's surrounding it, or exactly as you said. Maybe the process has deformed the brain tissue in that area. So now it's different. So then that's where we need to start playing with, should we create grids within each person's brain, right, to look for heterogeneity with it, to measure that heterogeneity. So exactly like the slide I showed here, this is what we need to be aware of. This is what we need to be aware of, correct? Like how are we comparing the areas? Because if we compare the whole brain versus sections of the brain, within the brain or between brains, that's going to be what we're working on. Make sense? But you see, right now, for all of you, you can just absolutely forget everything I said. Because you're not going to do anything with it. You're just going to try. You're just going to give it a go. And then you can say, I need more data, please, right? Because that's what's going to happen. You're not going to train successfully, and you're just going to say, I need more data. But that's what we're trying to do is provide a little insight to that process. Make sense? Any other questions? We have 10 minutes. So no, I'm kidding. So for heterogeneity, we're done. Next would be, all right, we'll leave that on, let's get the light. Anything on this morning? Any questions on this morning? Like the whole process? Upscaling, blurriness, noise, that process? No, we're good? We've got that one down? Yeah? Yeah, it's not an easy topic, but it's one that, as I said, is what you're going to deal with the most, okay, when you get into the space, for sure. And the reason you're dealing with it is essentially the introduction of heterogeneity into your data set, or the loss of signal. So basically, any kind of blurriness, any kind of pixelation, even brightness and contrast, what happens is you potentially lose your ROI. So meaning the region of interest is no longer visible to the model. Okay, so what is required to make the decision is not visible anymore, or is obstructed, or is not clear. That's it.
I had a question regarding the resolution, the pixel loss when we have a high resolution image spec any images, when we, the normal data set what is available, it's in 2 KB, I had spoke regarding the same. I think this is where I need to concentrate in that case. Resolution change. Like when you're feeding to the model,
yes,
the resolution should be less, otherwise.
Well, the resolution will be forcibly less if you have a very high resolution image, yes, because they're designed for a specific size. So they were kind of 128 by 128 for the longest time, 256 by 256 these days, and now some models are going bigger to 512 by 512. Anything bigger than that is pretty rare, because it's computationally too expensive to load up all those images into the memory of the computer to do the processing. It's just too much. And they also showed that, for the level that we're working at, 256 by 256 and 512 by 512 is actually really good, right? So it's all dependent on what you're working on. Like if we're going to do a 15T, MRI, well then, yeah, 256 by 256 might be like, what's the point? Like, you're just losing everything, all the advantages of a very high Tesla MRI, right? So that's what's going to change it. If you look at ultrasound, I mean, wow, right? It's pretty crude. Now, the only thing is they're coming out with high-resolution ultrasound. It exists now, and it's actually stunning. When you look at high-resolution ultrasound, you're like, oh, what? That's an ultrasound? It's amazing.
What's the solution? Like, if I'm going to lose something here,
Yeah, but like, so the question would be, it's all relative, right? So, are you losing? That's the question. Are you losing? You may not be. So what's the resolution you're working at? Like, what's the resolution you're getting the images at?
no, that's what, I have the data set.
Yeah.
readily available.
And so what's the resolution?
24
Well, yeah, but that's just size, right? So you have to know, because it all depends. I mean, if it's just a black image, then it could be that, right?
It's MRI.
But it just depends on it. But you just have to see if you're going down, how far you're going down. You're going to lose information. But the thing is, if you're going down to 256 by 256, you're probably fine, right? If you're going up, no, that's where you lose, right? If you've got a small, as you say, that's what you're concerned about, right? That you might have a 50 by 50 image, and you need to bring it up to 256 by 256, right? Yeah. So that's the biggest problem. That's a huge problem. That's a for real problem. That's what the machine was saying. Padding and then upscaling is one way. And then I was poking her a little bit. There are now some diffusion models, some what they call super resolution CNNs. Those are models that they're trying to do exactly that. They're trying to take that 50 by 50 image and upscale it without loss of resolution. Because if you just upscale it, you lose it. Inevitably, it gets pixelated. You'll lose it. But you have to have a trained model to upscale, right? I mean, you can do VAEs. People have done that as well, encoder, decoder, VAEs. But the problem is they hallucinate because that's not what they're designed to do, right? But diffusion models are generative, right?
Suggestion for this, dimensionality reduction, PCA. She's asking reduction in the dimension when the data is more.
Oh, yeah. You mean like in terms of, are you doing image analysis?
That was like, if I want to reduce the resolution of a PET, because it comes in high resolutions.
Yeah, but that's
If
okay.
I want to feed that,
So just the image itself? Then you
PET
can.
image.
Yeah, but an image is an image, right?
Yeah.
So you have an overlay, right? You have PET over MRI, right? You're using the combined image after you've dealt with all the distortions and all that fun stuff, right? But you've got an image, right? Yeah. So then you're just gonna downscale it, and that's okay. That's okay because you're going from high to low, and so as long as the algorithm that's downscaling it, you won't lose crucial information because you're going from really high resolution to less resolution, but the less resolution is exactly what the algorithm wants. So yes, you can lose information, absolutely. And is there the possibility you'll lose a little bit of signal? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But typically you're okay. Typically you're okay. Because of the way it works for downscaling, it's okay. Right? Because it's just taking surrounding pixels. Anyway, you should be all right. So I wouldn't, don't quote me on that. But I would say you're probably okay. Okay? For sure. And there's definitely a whole bunch of different ways to downscale with minimizing loss of information and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? That was a good one. That was a good one for sure. Because there's another common problem, right? And as I said, I mentioned compression. So upscaling, downscaling, and compression, kind of similar, happens all the time. Compression happens all the time. That's what JPEG is, right? You guys all use JPEG. That's the compression format, right? And so they need, those compression algorithms need to make it smaller, and to do that, it loses information because it just takes surrounding pixels, right? And so unfortunately, there's a loss of information. But usually within the window that we're working at, it's not bad. But if you really compress, it's a problem, right? A little bit of compression is okay, but a lot of compression then damages the image. Because when you come back, it's not the same anymore. You can't, right? Once you've compressed an image, it's compressed, right? So for you to uncompress it, you've already lost the information. So it's kind of a done deal.
I have one general question.
Sure.
Like, which image format is better? I mean, JPEG or PNG? We have many, right? Sometimes every time whenever I think like whether to take PNG or JPEG.
So I would say, it's a great question. It's kind of a flavor thing, you know, people's preferred flavor. But I would say, in general, it's PNGs. In general, it's PNGs. Just because the format is a little bit more useful, is that the right way? It has a little bit more flexibility than JPEG in terms of, you know, reading it in, manipulating the file, all that kind of stuff. PNG is a little bit easier to use, right, than JPEG. But you can use JPEG.
Because like sometimes what I do, like I am converting audio signal to image. So I'm getting spectrograms. So like every time I think whether I have to convert that signal into PNG or JPEG. Like that confusion is was there every time.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, like we tend to work in PNG. Most people I know tend to work in PNG, but you know what I mean?
Depends on the work.
Yeah, I mean, there's people that work with TIFF, right? There's TIFF that's being used. Because ultimately, you're just sucking it into your algorithm. So however you read that image into your algorithm is going to be the format you need. And typically, a lot of them, like a lot of the architectures, are reading in PNGs. But as you know, you can convert everything to everything.
So which, I mean, usually we use 224 into 224 or like that.
Anything around
so
there, yeah.
anything is, I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
is there any particular like length and width, I mean, which is preferred?
Nope.
It's a general question.
Nope,
because-
nope. It's all to do with the architecture you're dealing with. Because when they built that architecture, they chose a specific image size to fit what they wanted to do. And they want to use an image that's large enough that it produces a good model and small enough that it doesn't overwhelm the computer.
Yeah,
So
is
that's
also
the
I have
choice.
One question,
Yeah.
like, even that is also one of the questions I wanted to ask, like, the bigger size is better or the small size images are better?
Okay, so in terms of resolution and in terms of information in the image, the bigger the better. Absolutely 100%. The way you can kind of gauge if you're wanting to work in a large image size or not is going to be your batch size. So if you have very large images and you have an architecture that allows large images, because not all architectures do, but if you do, or if you modify the input layers, right, so that you can take on a big image, then what's going to determine whether you made the right choice is your batch size. So for instance, your computer may just be overwhelmed and you're going to have to work at a batch size of 1. No, right? Like it's not going to work. So then you're going to have to once again find that sweet spot of batch size, like how many images per batch works best for learning and doesn't overwhelm your computer system. And so that's what's going to determine it ultimately, that if it's too big because you just don't have the computer to do it, then you're going to downsize. And then you downsize to, you know, like an image size that's still going to be efficient, right, for what you want to do, your task at hand. But that's essentially what determines that combination. Yeah. Not an easy question, because everybody suffers that problem, like literally everybody. When you do any work, the first thing you deal with is that, right? Or DICOM. So you guys may not work in DICOM, but DICOM's a pain in the you-know-what. Like it's just a very heavy architecture, format, sorry. But everything in medical imaging comes in DICOM. So typically you convert it. So either, as Ernest said, most often you're going to convert it to Nifty if you're working with three-dimensional space. And if you're working in 2D space, then you're just going to move it right to PNG or something like that. But you're going to convert it out of DICOM. There are DICOM libraries that you can read in directly DICOMs. You know, the only reason you would do that is to lighten up your pipeline, right? Because for training, it doesn't matter. You can, you know, the architecture doesn't care, right? An image, pixels are pixels, right? Or voxels are voxels. But it's afterwards when you're going to, you know, put the algorithm into use in your hospital. you have to think of your input. So if your input is a DICOM file and you train everything on nifties or PNGs, well, that's not going to work. So then that means that in your pipeline, you're going to have to convert your DICOM that you're receiving, convert it, and then put it into your algorithm for inference. And it will work, but the thing is it will slow things down. So then if you have a very prominent radiologist sitting at his or her desk and waiting for the answer, you don't want to make them wait for too long, because if you do, they say, your software is crap, and then you don't get it, right? So that's the reason. So literally, it would just be for latency. All right? Okay, thank you, guys. Look at that, right on time. I think we're doing lunch, and then when we come back, I get to listen. At 2 o'clock, sorry. When you come back at 2 o'clock, I get to be the audience.